January 17, 1941. Over northern France. A lone Spitfire slices through the pre-dawn sky, its engine a disciplined roar against the silence of occupied territory. Below, the German coastline stretches in ordered precision, unaware of the British eyes above. In the cockpit, Flight Lieutenant James Harrington adjusts the camera mounted beneath his wing, every movement measured, every second critical. The mission is simple in theory: photograph the enemy's naval installations, troop movements, and defensive positions. In practice, it is a ballet of precision, nerves, and courage. The Spitfire dives and banks, threading through anti-aircraft fire with uncanny accuracy. Harrington's hand hovers over the shutter, timing each exposure to capture the exact configuration of German batteries. A Junkers 88 roars into view, but the RAF pilot anticipates every move, slipping past unseen. Each image snapped is a revelation, a puzzle piece that could tilt the balance of the skies over Europe. Below, German observers squint into the early light, unaware that British reconnaissance is already a step ahead, their disbelief mirrored in eyes that cannot track the speed, skill, and stealth of the RAF above. The Spitfire banks, disappears into the cloud line, and the first prints of history's silent war are already taking shape. By 1940, Britain faced a war unlike any it had encountered in generations. Across Europe, German forces had moved with staggering speed, occupying France, the Low Countries, and pushing toward the Channel. The fall of France in June had left Britain standing alone against the Wehrmacht, its survival dependent not only on courage but on knowledge, the ability to see, anticipate, and strike before the enemy could respond. Intelligence was no longer a peripheral tool, it was the lifeline of the RAF and the nation. Within this environment, the Royal Air Force developed specialized reconnaissance units, dedicated solely to gathering precise photographic intelligence. Pilots trained rigorously to fly over heavily defended territory with minimal support. Unlike standard combat missions, reconnaissance demanded exacting discipline. Altitude, speed, and stealth mattered more than dogfighting skill. Photographers and pilots worked in tandem, understanding that a single misjudged maneuver could compromise an entire campaign. By late 1940, these reconnaissance flights had become the backbone of Britain's aerial strategy, providing commanders with real-time insight into German positions, troop concentrations, and fortifications. Aircraft modifications reflected this urgency. Spitfires and Hurricanes were stripped of unnecessary weight to improve speed and maneuverability, and high-resolution cameras were fitted beneath fuselages. Mosquitoes, fast and nearly invisible, carried out deep penetration missions, capturing intelligence far beyond the front lines. Each sortie required perfect execution, a combination of engineering, skill, and courage. Crews studied maps and intelligence reports with obsessive precision, knowing that each photograph could alter the course of an operation. The German forces, confident in their early successes, underestimated the sophistication of British reconnaissance. Anti-aircraft batteries scanned the skies routinely, yet many pilots reported difficulty in tracking the fleeting silhouettes of RAF aircraft. Luftwaffe observers often described their frustration at seeing ghosts in the sky, planes that appeared, gathered intelligence, and vanished without a trace. This growing disbelief would have profound consequences, forcing the Germans to adjust both tactics and perception, even as Britain quietly sharpened its edge in the skies above occupied Europe. RAF reconnaissance was more than an intelligence-gathering operation, it was a psychological tool. Commanders could plan attacks with confidence, knowing the enemy's layout, artillery positions, and reinforcements. In turn, pilots internalized the stakes. A successful mission demanded flawless judgment, unwavering nerves, and an understanding of human and mechanical limits. Training exercises in southern England simulated enemy defenses, but nothing could fully prepare them for the calculated chaos over France and the Low Countries. Each flight was a test of endurance and instinct, a dance with death conducted at hundreds of miles per hour. The combination of advanced technology, skilled pilots, and meticulous planning created a reconnaissance network that confounded German expectations. Where Wehrmacht officers anticipated scattered reports and guesswork, Britain delivered accuracy, consistency, and timing that seemed impossible. Each photograph, each aerial observation, chipped away at German confidence, instilling a creeping awareness that their opponents were not merely reacting, they were seeing, predicting, and controlling the battlefield with a precision that would define the RAF's role in the war. This network of reconnaissance, while invisible to the casual observer, set the stage for decisive operations across the European theatre. Britain's advantage in the air was not merely the aircraft or pilots, it was the knowledge extracted, analyzed, and applied with surgical precision. By the winter of 1940–41, the RAF's reconnaissance program had become a quiet but relentless force, shaping every subsequent engagement. The lessons learned in these early missions would directly influence the effectiveness of IAF strikes in later campaigns, allowing commanders to strike targets with minimal risk and maximum impact. It was this combination of daring, technology, and analysis that left German pilots both awed and perplexed, the disbelief that would give this story its extraordinary tension. As 1941 progressed, IAF reconnaissance missions became increasingly sophisticated, targeting strategic locations deep within German-occupied Europe. The pilots' focus was on critical intelligence, shipyards along the French coast, Luftwaffe airfields, and armored divisions poised for redeployment. Each flight was meticulously planned, taking into account enemy radar, anti-aircraft emplacements, and fighter patrols. Pilots memorized every contour of the terrain below, every river bend, every village that might conceal an armored column. The goal was simple yet daunting: gather intelligence with perfect accuracy and return unscathed. Spitfires were the backbone of these operations. Fast, maneuverable, and equipped with high-resolution cameras, they could dart into enemy territory, capture photographic data, and retreat before interception. Hurricanes supplemented these missions at medium range, while Mosquitoes carried out daring long-range reconnaissance, often flying hundreds of miles without escort. Each aircraft reflected a commitment to precision, every modification enhanced speed, agility, and the quality of images captured. Pilots and photographic specialists worked in tandem, timing shutter releases to account for speed, altitude, and atmospheric conditions. One miscalculation could blur an image, rendering days of planning useless. The Germans, initially dismissive of Britain's aerial reconnaissance, began to notice a troubling pattern. Reports from Luftwaffe pilots described British aircraft that seemed impossible to catch, capturing images with uncanny accuracy and vanishing before anti-aircraft batteries could react. Observers on the ground could not reconcile the speed, precision, and intelligence gathered by the RAF with their own expectations. Each successful mission created disbelief, undermining confidence in defensive measures and sowing doubt among commanders. Reconnaissance became not only a tactical asset but a psychological weapon, eroding the sense of control the Germans believed they held over occupied territory. The intelligence produced by these flights influenced operations at the highest levels. Bomber Command relied on reconnaissance to plan raids with surgical precision, identifying targets, assessing defenses, and timing strikes for maximum effect. Even minor reconnaissance missions could shift the balance in local engagements, as commanders adapted their tactics based on the positions of enemy units observed from the air. Over time, the cumulative effect of these missions gave Britain a decisive advantage, a detailed, dynamic map of the German war machine, allowing strategic decisions informed by sight rather than speculation. By early 1941, German pilots' disbelief had transformed into tactical caution. Fleets of interceptors patrolled areas where reconnaissance flights were expected, yet success remained elusive. RAF pilots operated under immense pressure, aware that a single error could be fatal. Yet the combination of skill, training, and technological innovation enabled them to execute missions that seemed impossible to their adversaries. The effectiveness of these operations laid the groundwork for Britain's broader air campaigns, demonstrating the indispensable role of intelligence in modern warfare and cementing the RAF's reputation as a force capable of seeing and shaping the battlefield with unmatched precision. These early reconnaissance successes created a foundation for exploring multiple dimensions of the RAF's dominance: the skill of its pilots, the technology of its aircraft, the psychological impact on German forces, and the tactical decisions shaped by intelligence. Each of these facets reveals why German pilots found the accuracy of British reconnaissance almost unbelievable, a story that unfolds not only in the air but across the broader theater of war. RAF reconnaissance pilots were a breed apart. Unlike conventional fighter pilots, their primary mission was observation and intelligence gathering, not dogfighting. This required a combination of nerve, precision, and split-second decision-making. Every flight demanded absolute focus. A lapse could mean a blurred photograph or a fatal interception. Pilots memorized flight paths, anticipating enemy patrols and anti-aircraft fire. They had to manage speed, altitude, and camera timing simultaneously, a mental balancing act under extreme stress. Many missions involved flying mere hundreds of feet above heavily defended installations, where every second of exposure increased the risk of detection. Their ability to remain calm under pressure, executing maneuvers that often defied expectation, was a critical element in the RAF's operational success. The RAF's technical edge was pivotal. Spitfires, Mosquitoes, and Hurricanes were modified for reconnaissance missions, stripped of unnecessary weight to enhance speed and maneuverability. High-resolution cameras were mounted beneath fuselages, capable of capturing detailed images from hundreds of feet in the air. Mosquitoes, in particular, became legendary for their combination of speed, range, and stealth. Engine modifications and lightweight airframes allowed these aircraft to evade German fighters and anti-aircraft batteries, often returning with crucial intelligence that altered the course of operations. British engineers innovated continuously, producing camera technology capable of rapid, clear exposures even under high-speed flight conditions. This marriage of precision engineering and piloting skill created a system that German forces could not predict or easily counter. From the German perspective, the RAF reconnaissance missions were baffling. Luftwaffe pilots reported frustration at aircraft that seemed to appear and disappear at will, often evading anti-aircraft fire with uncanny timing. Ground observers struggled to track Spitfires and Mosquitoes, noting their speed and low-altitude approaches with disbelief. Intelligence officers attempted to quantify the threat, yet photographic evidence consistently arrived in Britain with greater clarity than anticipated. This growing skepticism eroded confidence, forcing the Germans to reconsider assumptions about air superiority. The uncanny accuracy of RAF reconnaissance challenged traditional German tactics, creating a psychological strain that compounded operational vulnerabilities. British reconnaissance missions reshaped the battlefield before any bombs were dropped. Intelligence gathered from aerial photographs allowed RAF planners to identify weak points in German defenses, track troop movements, and anticipate reinforcements. Detailed mapping of enemy positions enabled precise targeting, reducing risks to bomber formations and ground forces alike. Pilots flying deep over occupied territory were effectively the eyes of the RAF, turning uncertainty into actionable strategy. Each successful sortie refined subsequent missions, creating a feedback loop where reconnaissance informed tactics, which in turn demanded ever more accurate intelligence. German defensive responses became reactive rather than proactive, illustrating how aerial observation could dictate the tempo of engagements without firing a single shot. RAF command relied heavily on the data delivered by reconnaissance pilots. Senior officers used aerial photographs to make critical decisions, from timing bombing raids to allocating fighter resources. The quality and consistency of reconnaissance allowed leadership to plan operations with confidence, shifting strategies based on real-time evidence rather than speculation. Pilots' reports influenced command judgments, from operational priorities to risk assessment. Leadership, therefore, depended on trust in both human skill and technological reliability, a symbiosis that Britain cultivated meticulously. Commanders recognized that mastery of information often outweighed numerical superiority, and the RAF's Recon units became indispensable instruments in translating raw data into decisive action. The impact of reconnaissance extended beyond strategy into the minds of enemy forces. German pilots and ground crews were constantly confronted by the seeming invisibility of British aircraft. Observers described aircraft vanishing from sight despite their best efforts to track them, and intelligence officers noted the precision of photographs that revealed positions they assumed were concealed. This disbelief fostered a sense of vulnerability and uncertainty, undermining morale. For British pilots, the knowledge that their missions carried strategic weight bolstered courage and focus, while for German forces, the inability to prevent accurate observation created tension and fear. Reconnaissance became a psychological weapon, subtly influencing behavior, tactics, and expectations across the European theater. June 12, 1941, over the French Channel coast. The mission was clear. A Spitfire reconnaissance flight was tasked with photographing the German naval base at Cherbourg, a critical hub for U-boat operations and coastal defenses. Flight Lieutenant Harrington and his wingmen took off in the early hours, engines humming with disciplined intensity. Every maneuver was pre-calculated, every second in enemy airspace counted. Below, German flak batteries slept in confidence, unaware that Britain's eyes were already upon them. The Spitfires darted over the channel at low altitude, weaving between radar coverage zones and dodging patrols of Messerschmitt Bf 109s. Harrington's camera clicked in precise intervals, each exposure capturing the exact placement of ships, gun emplacements, and logistical facilities. In the control room in Britain, intelligence officers awaited these photographs, knowing that every successful frame could inform the next RAF strike with surgical precision. As they approached Cherbourg, a Junkers Ju-88 scrambled from the base, alerted too late by radar that had only detected the Spitfire's passage. Harrington banked sharply, maintaining both speed and altitude to keep the aircraft stable for photography. The German pilot fired, traces streaking past, yet the Spitfire moved with a fluid, anticipatory grace. Within minutes, the aircraft had completed its run, each camera shutter synchronized perfectly with the ground below. Back in Britain, the first prints arrived within hours. Intelligence analysts studied them with meticulous care. Troop placements, artillery locations, and supply routes were all documented with unprecedented clarity. The precision stunned RAF planners. Not only did they now possess exact knowledge of Cherbourg's defenses, but they could anticipate German reactions, creating a tactical advantage that would be decisive in upcoming operations. For the German observers, disbelief was immediate. Patrol reports indicated aircraft that appeared and vanished without warning, cameras that captured every detail, and intelligence that consistently outpaced their own defensive calculations. Officers struggled to understand how Britain had obtained such complete information. It was more than a mission success, it was a revelation of the RAF's growing dominance in the air and in intelligence, a moment that shifted the perception of control in the skies over Europe. This flight, like many before it, exemplified the synthesis of human skill, technological innovation, and meticulous planning that defined RAF reconnaissance. Pilots executed near-impossible feats under fire, aircraft performed beyond conventional limits, and intelligence transformed raw observation into actionable strategy. Cherbourg was not merely photographed, it was mapped, analyzed, and neutralized in planning before any bombs were dropped. The success of this mission marked a turning point. German forces realized that conventional measures, radar sweeps, fighter patrols, and anti-aircraft batteries, were insufficient to counter Britain's precise aerial observation. In the following months, reconnaissance would continue to provide the RAF with intelligence superiority, allowing Britain to plan operations with confidence, mitigate losses, and maintain an upper hand in the increasingly contested skies over occupied Europe. June 13 to 20, 1941, expanding the reconnaissance offensive. Following the Cherbourg mission, the RAF intensified its reconnaissance operations along the French coastline. Spitfires, Mosquitoes, and Hurricanes were deployed on coordinated sorties, targeting German naval facilities, supply depots, and airfields. Each mission was carefully timed to exploit gaps in Luftwaffe patrols, with pilots relying on prior intelligence to navigate deadly anti-aircraft zones. Flight Lieutenant Harrington, now a veteran of multiple sorties, led a series of flights over Le Havre, Calais, and Boulogne, each operation executed with the same precision and discipline that had defined his earlier missions. On June 16, a Mosquito piloted by squadron leader Richard Benson penetrated further than any previous reconnaissance flight, flying low over heavily defended U-boat pens at Brest. The aircraft's speed and altitude rendered detection nearly impossible, while cameras captured detailed images of every docked submarine, transport vessel, and shore battery. The photographs, once analyzed, revealed weaknesses in German defensive layouts and suggested optimal times for RAF bombing raids. Intelligence officers marveled at the level of detail. Supply trains, fuel depots, and even small troop movements were visible. For the first time, commanders could anticipate enemy reinforcements with unprecedented accuracy. German pilots, observing the repeated incursions, grew increasingly frustrated. Reports described British aircraft executing maneuvers that seemed to defy conventional logic, appearing over a target, capturing detailed imagery, and disappearing before interception. Ground-based observers noted that reconnaissance sorties consistently returned unscathed, leaving German intelligence in disbelief. Commanders attempted to adapt, increasing fighter patrols and revising anti-aircraft positions, yet the RAF's combination of speed, altitude, and precision proved overwhelming. Each successful mission further destabilized German confidence, creating hesitation in decision-making that Britain would exploit in subsequent operations. By June 20, the cumulative effect of these reconnaissance flights had tangible consequences. Bomber Command, armed with accurate maps and intelligence, executed raids on Cherbourg, Brest, and Le Havre with surgical efficiency. Losses were minimized, and targets were struck with exacting precision. Intelligence gathered by reconnaissance units had turned the tide, allowing Britain to dictate both timing and targets, forcing German forces into a reactive stance. Pilots who had risked their lives in reconnaissance missions could see the direct impact of their work. Operations were no longer blind strikes but coordinated attacks informed by observation and analysis. This sustained reconnaissance offensive marked a decisive moment in the air war over Western Europe. RAF pilots, aircraft, and technology had combined to achieve what German forces had deemed impossible: accurate, reliable intelligence delivered from the skies above occupied territory. The psychological effect was profound. German commanders now faced the constant threat of invisible observers, their every defensive adjustment anticipated and countered. Britain had achieved more than tactical advantage. It had established a new paradigm for aerial warfare, where information, precision, and skill defined dominance. The success of these missions would influence every subsequent operation in the European theater, establishing reconnaissance as an essential component of military strategy. German disbelief, born from repeated encounters with Britain's aerial precision, underscored the growing importance of intelligence in shaping the course of the war. RAF reconnaissance had not only mapped the enemy, it had reshaped the battlefield itself, setting the stage for decisive campaigns that would follow. The immediate consequences of the RAF reconnaissance missions were profound. German forces, faced with a consistent pattern of accurate and undetected observation, struggled to adapt. Coastal defenses that had been considered secure were now exposed, supply routes and naval installations vulnerable to precision strikes. The psychological toll on Luftwaffe pilots and ground crews was apparent. Frustration and disbelief replaced confidence. Reports from occupied ports and airfields repeatedly described aircraft appearing and vanishing before anti-aircraft batteries could respond, and photographs arriving in Britain revealed positions that had seemed invisible to defenders. The sense of control Germany had maintained over occupied Europe was eroding. For Britain, the success of reconnaissance missions validated months of meticulous planning and innovation. Pilots, aircraft, and photographic teams had worked in tandem to create a system that was both reliable and strategically decisive. Intelligence officers analyzed each image with precision, converting visual data into actionable plans for bomber command and ground operations. The information gathered allowed Britain to strike at the enemy with unprecedented accuracy, minimizing risks while maximizing operational impact. Losses among reconnaissance aircraft remained comparatively low, highlighting the effectiveness of pilot training, technological innovation, and strategic planning. Beyond immediate operational advantages, these missions had a broader impact on the conduct of the war. German commanders began to question their assumptions about air superiority and defensive strategy. The realization that the RAF could penetrate defended airspace at will forced adjustments in patrol patterns, radar coverage, and anti-aircraft deployment. Yet these adaptations were often reactive, attempting to counter a system that Britain had already refined. In effect, the RAF dictated the tempo of operations, using intelligence to anticipate enemy movements and shape the battlefield before engagement. The success of reconnaissance also had a human dimension. RAF pilots understood the weight of their responsibility. Each mission carried not only the risk of life but the potential to shape the outcome of larger operations. The confidence gained from repeated successful sorties reinforced both skill and morale, creating a cadre of airmen whose precision and composure under pressure became legendary. Conversely, German pilots faced increasing stress and uncertainty, forced to respond to an adversary that consistently operated with superior knowledge. Reconnaissance had proven itself as more than a support function. It was a decisive instrument of war. The strategic advantage Britain gained through accurate, timely, and reliable intelligence allowed RAF and Allied forces to plan operations with clarity, striking targets with minimized risk and maximum impact. The lessons learned in these early 1941 missions would carry forward, influencing subsequent campaigns and cementing the importance of aerial observation as a cornerstone of modern warfare. The long-term effects of Britain's reconnaissance dominance became increasingly apparent as 1941 progressed. German defenses remained on alert, but no adjustment could fully negate the RAF's ability to gather intelligence with speed and accuracy. Each successful sortie reinforced Britain's strategic advantage, allowing operations to be executed with calculated precision. Coastal bases, airfields, and supply lines that had once been considered secure were repeatedly exposed, enabling targeted strikes that disrupted German operations without the need for large-scale frontal attacks. The RAF's ability to dictate the terms of engagement shifted the balance in the air war, giving Britain a persistent edge in both offense and defense. The impact on German command decisions was significant. Intelligence officers struggled to reconcile the photographic evidence with their own field reports, often underestimating the RAF's reach and effectiveness. This dissonance created operational hesitation, as commanders weighed the reliability of their defensive measures against the undeniable accuracy of British reconnaissance. Luftwaffe pilots faced the added psychological burden of encountering aircraft that were both elusive and precise, eroding morale and creating uncertainty across multiple fronts. The RAF's success in reconnaissance forced the Germans into a reactive posture, a shift that Britain leveraged repeatedly. British commanders capitalized on this advantage, refining both operational planning and resource allocation. Bomber Command used reconnaissance data to select targets with surgical accuracy, minimizing collateral damage while maximizing strategic effect. Fighter Command integrated intelligence into patrol routes, anticipating Luftwaffe deployments and intercepting threats before they could endanger critical missions. Reconnaissance reports also informed ground operations, providing insight into enemy troop movements, fortification strength, and logistical vulnerabilities. In this way, a single photograph could influence outcomes far beyond the immediate scope of the mission, shaping campaigns and altering the trajectory of the war. Beyond the battlefield, these operations had a lasting influence on military thought and strategy. The importance of timely and accurate intelligence became universally recognized, reinforcing the concept that information could be as decisive as firepower. British reconnaissance missions demonstrated the power of combining human skill, technological innovation, and meticulous planning. The lessons learned would influence not only future IAF operations but also the broader Allied approach to intelligence, contributing to the eventual success of campaigns across Europe. Ultimately, the effectiveness of IAF reconnaissance left a permanent mark on both sides of the conflict. Britain's ability to gather intelligence with precision established a model for aerial operations, while German disbelief underscored the psychological and tactical impact of observation. The era of reconnaissance dominance reshaped the air war, demonstrating that control of information could redefine the battlefield, tilt engagements in favor of the prepared, and instill uncertainty and hesitation in the unprepared. The story of RAF reconnaissance during World War II reveals a truth that extends beyond planes and cameras. Knowledge is power, and precision is its most potent weapon. In an era defined by speed, firepower, and strategic maneuvering, Britain's ability to see and understand the battlefield before committing forces became a decisive advantage. Pilots risked their lives in fragile aircraft, relying on skill, intuition, and split-second judgment to deliver intelligence that would shape entire campaigns. Each photograph captured, each flight executed with exacting discipline, represented more than data. It was a statement of control, foresight, and resilience. For German pilots and commanders, the experience was disorienting. They faced an adversary who could observe without being seen, strike without warning, and anticipate their every move. Disbelief transformed into cautious respect as the RAF repeatedly demonstrated that mastery of information could equal mastery of territory. The psychological impact of these reconnaissance missions cannot be overstated. Precision and invisibility combined to unsettle even the most confident defenders, proving that modern warfare relied as much on perception and anticipation as on numbers or firepower. The legacy of these operations extends far beyond the skies of occupied Europe. Britain's pioneering approach to aerial intelligence laid the foundation for modern reconnaissance and surveillance strategies, influencing both military doctrine and technological development for decades. It highlighted the synergy of human skill and engineering innovation, showing that courage and intellect could amplify the impact of technology. Every successful sortie was a lesson in preparation, timing, and the art of observation, principles that remain relevant to this day. In reflecting on these missions, one sees a broader truth about warfare and history. Dominance is not always visible, and power is often measured in knowledge rather than destruction. The RAF's reconnaissance operations exemplified this principle, demonstrating that careful observation, disciplined execution, and technological ingenuity could shape the course of a conflict. The disbelief of German pilots stands as testament to Britain's mastery of the skies, a silent but decisive force that transformed intelligence into action and action into victory.